for giving them life and breath. And as we think of today, I just pray for these commissioners and all the staff and support people who are here. Pray that you would give them the wisdom that they need to make decisions with wisdom, with compassion, with kindness, that you would give them the guidance they need, the supernatural insight to make our county an even better place to live, work, and play. And so we just give this meeting to you. We pray that you be all in and through it for your glory. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. I don't believe we have any awards, presentations, or proclamations on our agenda today. So moving on to the consent agenda, pursuant to Florida law, the public has a right to be heard on all propositions except when the Board of County Commissioners is acting on ministerial or emergency matters or conducting a meeting exempt from Section 286.011 Florida statutes. Public comment time on propositions shall be 3 minutes for individuals and 6 minutes for group representatives. The right to be heard during quasi-judicial hearings is governed by Florida law, and the public will be provided the opportunity to be heard on non-agenda matters at the end of the meeting. Proper decorum will be observed, and that is at the end of our 1:30 meeting this afternoon. In accordance with the operating policies and procedures of the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners, Section 2.175, Public Participation Before the Board, comments shall be limited to the subject being considered by the Board. All public comments shall avoid personal attacks, abusive language, and redundancy. Disrespectful, rude, irrelevant, or slanderous remarks or disruptive behavior may subject the individual to removal from the board chambers, and the chairman may curtail repetitious comments. Do we have anyone who has filled out a form to submit public comment?
No, ma'am.
Okay, if there's any member of the public here, there's the green and the yellow form that you would have been given an opportunity to fill out in the lobby. I don't see anyone running toward the podium. Mr. Manager, do we have any changes to the consent agenda?
No, ma'am, no changes.
Okay, any commissioners have any items they'd like to discuss? I'd like to pull item number 1 for discussion.
Okay. Madam Chair,
Yes.
make a motion to approve items 2 through 13 and item 14 and 15 of the constitutional officers consent agenda.
Second.
There's a motion by Commissioner Zembauer, second by Delary. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And I'm pulling number 1 for discussion just to highlight, and I don't know, look at Christina's already standing there. I'm very comfortable with what is being presented today. What I'd like to do, if we could, is look at what our options may be next year or later on. I'm not sure what the process would be. I'll be completely candid with everyone and employees who maybe I'm feeling your pain. I don't know, maybe I'm not. But I have not had the best customer service experience with Chard Snyder as our FSA. It's been an ongoing situation, and I'm thinking if I'm just one, I don't know how many others there may be, and I would love to look at other opportunities that may be more helpful for our employees, perhaps looking at Cigna, you doing that as this, but anyway, so that's where my brain is thinking forward. Christina, do you have anything you can share with us about that?
Certainly, we typically come to you in March with a work session just to give you an idea of where we are with all of the benefit plans. And I'm sorry, good morning, Christina Brandolini, Human Resources Director. You started talking to me, so good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. So when we come in March, unless you want to make a motion now for us to go out to do an RFP or RFQ, I don't know all the procurement ins and outs. But since we are with Cigna, there would be an ease of transition for people who have an FSA, some other information, unless it was medical, unless it was vision or dental or something else. But there would be a little bit of an ease there. So, certainly we can do an RFP. I have heard from a few other folks that they're having the same password entry issue. And certainly if anybody has any concerns or issues with any of the plans, they can certainly contact us, and we can try to help rectify those. But so we can absolutely go out to RFP to just see what the options are. We've been with Shard Snyder at least since I've been here, which is 8 years.
Commissioner Herr and then Commissioner Zembauer.
So I would say that we have been with Shard Snyder for a very long time. I've not had the FSA issues that it sounds like you're having, maybe for reason, I mean, I live in the space, so it's a little bit of a different experience. I would say, though, that you are about to launch the team into a significant amount of work, because an RFP for an FSA is not an easy lift. And if the thought process is, which I think would be legitimate, the thought process is that it would be connected to Cigna, because we have talked about connecting it in the with former vendor, we couldn't do that. When you connect an FSA to the medical carrier, you can have the claims auto-adjudicate. It is a much easier experience, and I think the one you were used to at the school district. And in that instance, I would just throw out there to the team that that would be a single source, because they are the only ones that can auto-adjudicate. No one else can auto-adjudicate because Cigna won't send them the claims. So that, I would say, if that's the path we want to go down, we should probably give that direction as opposed to a market search. For those that would be concerned about not doing a market search, the average cost for an FSA is roughly $5 per employee in the grand scheme of the savings. If you're saving anything, let's call it 20%, which won't happen. It's $1 per employee per month. The savings to that versus the convenience of putting it in. And our consultant knows all the going prices for FSAs, so he can get Cigna to the reasonable price. I think there's other areas of the plan that would have time more wisely spent that we need to be paying attention to, and that RFP would be a heavy lift.
Commissioner Zembauer.
I agree with the Shard Snyder. I quit using them after my first year here. I dropped that. As far as I'm concerned, are useless. With that, I'm happy to make a motion to move towards Cigna, having a discussion with Cigna about picking that up.
The only, if you don't, may I? The question, and maybe this is a question for Christina. I know open enrollment starts next month. How is this, if we do move forward, how would this impact open enrollment?
It would have to be for the 2025 year,
Gotcha.
so,
Gotcha. Oh, gotcha.
so it wouldn't impact for 2024. So we
Perfect,
would
thank
have
you.
one more year.
Gotcha.
So, Commissioner Zembauer, that's a motion to?
That is a motion to direct staff to work with Cigna and bring something back to us for consideration.
For January 1 of 2024.
Correct.
Second.
There's a motion by Zembauer,
25?
5. Thank you. How's that possible?
I don't know.
Well, bring it to us before then,
I
so we
threw
know
you-
what's
I
going
threw you
on.
off.
Effective date of 1/1 of 25.
Motion by Commissioner Zembauer, second by Commissioner Herr. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We will bring it to you in March.
And then we have all of the other items, Commissioner Herr, that are,
I would make a motion to move forward with item number 1.
Second.
there's a motion by Commissioner Herr, second by Commissioner Zembauer. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. When you flip through 20 items that quickly, it's quite remarkable. Moving on to county manager and staff briefings, item number 16 is regarding the Charter Review Commission appointments.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chairman and Commissioners. You all know we've been working on this for quite some time. We just have a few tweaks to make to our appointments. As you know, the charter review, we have to review our charter, and it's for next year. So any potential items that could change, it needs to be on the ballot, in November of 2024. And so the committee needs to start meeting. And so what I just passed out, or Kate, thank you, Kate, passed out to the commission, I know staff has briefed you all have given us your appointments. I just want to go through and just explain what the charter says. And the charter specifically says 15 members sit on the Charter Review Committee. One has to be a representative from each of the cities, of the 7 cities. Then each of you for your district gets a district appointment. And then we have 3 at-large appointments that the board can make. I know staff has met with you all. There's been a couple different guidelines that they have set on how we reach that 15-member board. So as you can see, we are at 16 that you all have submitted to us, and really 15, but the 16th is there was no representative from the city of Castleberry that we had to fill. And so I know the chairman, you had actually reached out and got a willing participant to fill that role, even though it's not your appointment. So what I would like to do, and up to the chairman, if you agree, if we go block by block, the charter says we have to fill the cities, each representative from the city. So what we have listed on here is on the right-hand column is the district that had submitted the name for each of the blocks. And then you'll notice if you go down to the third block in the at-large, where it says location on the left-hand side, that is the district in which that individual lives in. And to the right is the district, again, is the commission district that submitted the name of that person. So just so it, and we do have the addresses for everyone on here, so there might have to be a little tweaking on here. So, Chairman, if you want, we could just go through each of the blocks. What we're looking at is they were looking to start to have the first meeting this month in September, but we're still on track if we have it in October. So I think once we get this committee appointed, we're looking at the first week of October to hold the first meeting.
I think that's a great suggestion. Commissioners, the names that have been submitted to fulfill the requirement of a member from each of the 7 cities, you see the names that are before you. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to approve those names being appointed to the Charter Review Commission?
I'd be happy to make that motion.
All right, motion by Commissioner Herr.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Zembauer. Any discussion?
Can you define what that motion is again?
The motion is to approve Angela Fleming, Colleen Hufford, Emily Talman, Bruce Kubik, Tom O'Hanlon, Michelle Smith, and John Hurran.
Okay.
It's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Commissioner Constantine?
Just a matter of going through this process, and just a question, is somebody asked me just when I was coming, is Deborah Bauer a resident of Castleberry?
No.
Okay. So if we approve these 7 and then we approve the 5, basically what we're saying is at the at-large, we're going to have to eliminate 1. Is that basically what we're going to do?
That's correct.
Okay. So,
Can I question that? Just to tag on to what you're saying. If we're going block by block, if you approve the 7, which gets the 7 cities covered, which it's my understanding, and I could have misunderstood you, but the people on the bottom, in the bottom 2 blocks don't live in a city.
They can live in a city.
The last ones cannot.
The last ones can.
Yeah.
They can live in a city, but none of them live in the city
Is
that
that
doesn't
correct?
have
Correct.
coverage, which is
Correct.
Castleberry. So
Correct.
They have to be unincorporated. One segment has to be from the unincorporated portion of Seminole County.
that's the middle
That's-
block.
I think Craig can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the district appointment can be anywhere in your district.
I'll read it to
Right.
you. Of the 15 members, at least 1 member must reside within each municipality, at least 1 member must reside in the unincorporated
Okay.
area of each county commission district.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And so, from what I gathered, if the top block is the most obvious block to cover the cities. Deborah doesn't live in a city. Nicole does not live in a city. I do not know about Marilyn Crotty, but I do not believe she lives in a city.
No, she does not.
Dr. Robin Dellinger does not live in a city. and I know Rusty Roberts does not live in the city. So, and then I go back to the bottom block. I don't know about James Dick, whether he lives in a city or not. I do not believe so, so we need to verify that.
So, yeah, Ms. Kuntz already has, I believe, done that due
Correct.
diligence.
Right.
And
So if you'll notice, on the last block, on the last block, it says location. That's the district that they're in.
But are they in a city?
No.
Okay, so
No,
that,
that's-
And they don't need to be,
No.
city or county.
they don't need to be, but I'm trying to get to
Yes.
the answer to your question, Commissioner.
Well, I hadn't finished, but that's okay.
But the question was, if we say yes to the first block, does that automatically mean that somebody falls out from the third block?
That's-
And I think it means that somebody can fall out from either Block 2 or Block 3.
Yes, that's correct.
right, so Commissioner Zembauer.
I'll try to make this easy. There's 7 cities, there's 5 commissioners. 2 commissioners are going to have to pick 2 from a city to make it work. I don't know any other way you cannot do it. I think that's your only option. Now, if you want to take Castleberry and stand alone, which is the open, that is my district, Commissioner Lockhart's district, and Commissioner Delari's district.
No, I don't.
Yeah, you got part of it.
I got a very small piece of Castleberry,
Yeah.
very small piece.
Yeah. You want to give it up?
Not the way it works.
I think with an uneven number of cities and the fact that some districts have far more than one city within their district, it made it impossible for staff to come up with a recommendation that would make it equitable in terms of city representation. So I think the county manager's thought process is, let's make sure we take care of the thing that we are required by our charter to do, which is to have the 7 cities represented. We have to do that, regardless of who appoints which person, regardless of which one of us appoints which member of the cities, we have to have 7 cities. So it was, I think, less important to say, this is my appointment, this is your appointment, and more that we were fulfilling the requirement of the charter.
But understood, but we also have a requirement that 1 from each district must be in the unincorporated area. So we have the requirement of the city in the charter, we have the requirement of the unincorporated in the charter, which then leaves the at-large, if you will.
Well, in my mind, it doesn't, because the 2 bottom boxes overlap.
Correct.
So because none of them live in the city, the top box is the box that stands alone.
Correct.
And then from the bottom 2 boxes, we have 1 too many. And from my perspective, and please correct me if I'm wrong, County Attorney, I don't necessarily know that the point at which it gets to the board, that we still have to be aligned to, I have my 3. We have to be aligned to meeting the charter requirement.
Correct.
There were head nods for the record from the
Yes.
county manager and the county attorney. So if you all are comfortable with at least because we have a motion and a second on the cities, if moving forward with that, if we could get that done, and then we can tackle the bottom 2 boxes? There's,
Again, as I was talking, I think that they're all related, though. Yes, yes, we have to, by the charter, have the 7 cities, and yes, we have to, by the charter, have 1 from each unincorporated district. The next thing, though, is that I think it's important that each of us, as commissioners, have 3 appointments. I don't think that it's, in any case, we're one, and nothing against the fact that I think that the chairman went ahead and tried to find somebody from Castleberry, because nobody did that. So I'm not assuming that that was some sort of plot or anything else. I'm just saying, at this point, I think that it's important that we try to make sure that within the context of what we have with the charter, that we have 3 members. If we approve the first one and the second one, somebody is going to have only 2 appointments. And that to me is also, I think, uncomfortable. I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, so we can tackle that. So the fact that it was brought to my attention that we were coming very close last month to coming to this process without a representative from the city of Castleberry was concerning to me. And as the chairman, I felt like it was my responsibility to try and fix a situation that commissioners among themselves were not able to come to a solution on. So I reached out to Ms. Kuntz and said, I found somebody from Castleberry who's willing to serve. And because it was not my appointment, I was not, but it could have been. What was presented, and I'll let the county attorney address this if she'd like to, what was presented to us in 2 different phases for suggestions for how the board could proceed with finding members of this commission were just that. They were suggestions. And so when we got to where Commissioner Zembauer had already found his appointees before that second advisory opinion suggestion came out, we hit a little bit of a roadblock. So I was far less concerned with everybody having 3 and far more concerned with having the charter requirements be fulfilled. So the issue of everybody having 3 is something that I guess we're going to have to, start rolling dice or rock, paper, scissoring, but we have to have a member from who lives in each of the 7 cities. And the concern over who has, I got more bubble gum in my jar than you did. I don't have time for that. We just need to get these appointments done and make sure that we fulfill the requirements of the charter. And I assure you, Colleen Hufford, who is the person who graciously offered to serve, she has served in the past. She's a former elected official. She is very well liked by members of this community and has no axe to grind with anyone on this board. So I thought it was actually a rather good get. But that's where we are.
So I'll make this easy on everybody. Although I was the first commissioner to get all mine in and get it done, I'd like to move this along because, quite honestly, that's a mischaracterization that we've been unable to work this out ourselves. I think we all have followed direction from staff. I followed it from almost a year ago. So with that said, I will drop Nicole Martz and Colleen Hofford can go in. And if that's a problem for legal can figure it out from there. That's all. I'm done talking about it.
So
is that a motion?
But wait a minute.
No, I'm just saying I'm going to drop from my list Nicole Martz and slide Colleen in.
But she lives in the city.
I understand.
So
Somebody's got to appoint 2 from a city.
there's a District 2.
So then Mr. Dix would go
Yes.
up as District 2, where Nicole Martz, if that's what the motion
Lives in
is.
District 5.
If that's what happens, then District 2, or he's on District 5, you're right, I'm sorry, I thought it was District 2, you're right. So we need now a candidate from District 2 if we do that, correct?
Well,
I think maybe.
you have a
instead of-
candidate from District 2 because in the 3rd box,
No, they're not from District 2. They
oh,
live-
I'm sorry,
They
he's
live
from
in-
District 5, the district commissioners who put him in. Sorry.
Actually,
I agree, Commissioner, and I want to make sure that everybody knows, this was nothing personality, and I understand why you presented that person. What I was trying to say is I do feel, however, at the same time, that it's important that you have somebody from each particular, 3 from each district. Now, if you, to go along with what Commissioner Zembauer just did, if you keep Ms. Martz and you take out, again, this is no personalities, this is just trying to get to the point. You keep her from District 2 and you eliminate Mr. Dick from District 2, then you have the same thing.
So Mr. Dix lives in District 5. He was appointed
Right.
or recommended by District 2.
But we need somebody from District 2 if you eliminate
do.
Ms. Martz.
You do.
If you keep Ms. Martz, then you have everybody in the second box together. The third box then becomes the 3 people from appointed by District 1, 5, and 3, and they're from 1, 5, and 1. But we have what the charter requires completed. So I'm suggesting to Commissioner Zimbauer, instead of eliminating Ms. Marks, you eliminate Mr. Dick in your motion. And then the charter's complete. The charter, what the requirements of the charter is complete. Would that be acceptable, Commissioner Zimbauer?
I'd just like to move it on.
Then I'll make that motion.
Second.
So there's already a motion and a second on the table.
Thank you.
For the city representatives.
Call the vote.
Okay.
So-
I was just trying to move it along too. We got the whole thing potentially worked out.
There's a motion and a second to appoint Angela Fleming, Colleen Hufford, Emily Tallman, Bruce Kubek, Tom O'Hanlon, Michelle Smith, and John Haran as the respective city representatives for the charter. Is there any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
I will make a motion then to approve the second box, 5 individuals, and the third box, eliminating Mr. Dick.
There's a motion by Commissioner Constantine. Commissioner Herr?
Did you
Oh,
second that?
would you?
Second.
Well, I didn't know if you were second by Commissioner Zimbauer, and then I saw your hand pop up.
I just want to get this on the record because I have asked the question behind the scenes and I'm going to own it. Nicole serves as the executive director at the airport, so she serves at the will of the board of the airport, and we have a board member that serves on the board of the airport. And so does that pose any appearance of or conflict of interest? Because there is the possibility of undue influence. This is supposed to be a completely independent board. The rest of the names on this, I can't draw, I'll use your term, a direct nexus to any of those individuals, but we
But-
have no relationship with them whatsoever.
Yeah, if that's the case, we're going to eliminate several on this list.
And if I can, Madam
Because
Chair.
they serve as
I
employed.
serve on the Affordable Housing Board with Mr. Scott Culp, who
So
appears
I
to
think
be,
it's two different things. He's not the paid executive director of the Affordable Housing Board, is he?
no.
That's the difference for me, is that she's employed by the airport that you serve on the governing board of.
But Madam Chair, he is not, and our position is not a voting member.
We're a liaison.
We're a
We're
liaison.
a non-voting member.
We're a non-voting member.
That's helpful, thank you.
I will say, I did ask also the county attorney and the county manager to just look at the relationship between the city and the airport, because the charter says specifically that no elected official or department director of any city, and because the city commission appoints their board and approves their budget, I wasn't sure if Ms. Marks would be considered a department director, because they're, again, a different type of perceived potential conflict. But I did run that up the food chain just to see what that might look like, and there is no legal conflict. It is not considered a department of the city, but I had the similar potential concern. Any comments on that? Anything to weigh in on? Okay. All right, so there's a motion and a second to appoint Deborah Bauer for unincorporated District 1, Nicole Martz for unincorporated District 2, Marilyn Crotty for unincorporated District 3, Dr. Robin Dellinger for unincorporated District 4, and Rusty Roberts for unincorporated District 5. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
I do believe that motion included the three
3 at the bottom.
at large
Yes, it
as
did. I
well.
was
Oh,
trying to
did
say
it?
that.
You didn't
Yes,
just
it did.
restate it, but the motion stated that.
My
with- With
apologies.
the elimination of Mr. Dick.
Mr. Dix, okay. So thank you very much for catching that. All right,
You're welcome.
I think we're done with that. I think we're seated. And Ms. Coons, do you have anything you'd like to share with us about the process moving forward?
No, ma'am, what I will
She
do
wants to get out
is, we'll make sure that a welcome letter gets out to them from you this week, and we had, as Mr. Gray stated, we had planned on the first meeting being September 21st, but since it's so close to today, we suggested that probably October 5th was better, and it could give them a little more time notice to be here. And we'll let that be in the letter, as well as we're pulling together an electronic packet for them.
Sounds great.
All right, thank you.
And we may want to make a recommendation that the Charter Review Board, during their process, talk about this process. Maybe we need to have it spelled out more clearly in the charter, or maybe provide for some alternates or something like that. I don't know. All right, thank you all very much for helping us get that done. The next item, item 17, is a review of our evaluation and appraisal report. It's actually agendaed really as a workshop
Yes.
type item, so.
And I will have Rebecca Hammack introduce this item.
So, good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Rebecca Hammack, Development Services Director. Myself and Eliza Harris-Giuliano will be presenting the second work session on the ear-based amendments. And as soon as we can get our PowerPoint up, I'll go over a slide just on where we are in the process, and then Eliza will conclude with the rest of the presentation. So again, this is the second work session on the ear-based amendments, and these are the amendments to the comprehensive plan that follow the evaluation and appraisal report. So based on the first work session that we had on August 8th, I did add a slide of the overall process for the growth management key strategic priorities. So the first item that has been completed of these action steps was the Envision Seminole 2045 plan, and this incorporated the listening tour and the education tour that came out of the KSPs.
Goodbye.
And then even before that process started, we had begun the process of amending the land development code, and at the time we were calling those our hot button amendments to the land development code that did evolve over time and included additional changes. That still is in process, but we are bringing that to you for first reading of the ordinances, because we have an ordinance to amend the land development code and an ordinance amending the comprehensive plan that is needed in order to implement those changes to the land development code. That will be before you on September 26th. So the Envision Seminole 2045 plan is completed. We're in process for the first round of land development code changes. We are now, we did our evaluation and appraisal report, which was due last year, so that has been completed. So based on that evaluation and appraisal report, we are now doing the ear-based amendments, which are the amendments to the comprehensive plan based on that evaluation and appraisal report. And then once we have completed these ear-based amendments that we'll be discussing today, then we anticipate additional changes to the land development code to implement the current comprehensive plan changes that we're proposing. So we'll be bringing more land development code changes to you next year. So that's where we are in the process. I hope that clarifies. I know it's a multi-step process, but we just wanted to kind of give an overview of where we are. So with that, I will turn it over to Eliza so that she can go forward. It's not working. Sorry. All right, well, I'll turn it over to Eliza, and she can discuss the additional slides.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Okay. So just to reiterate where Rebecca said we are, the board accepted the Envision Seminole 2045 vision report, as well as the evaluation and appraisal of the comprehensive plan back in November, and we are coming forward with changes to the comprehensive plan based on the vision and the EAR. So this is where we are in the comprehensive plan update process. Of course, based on the vision in the ear, we had one work session back in August. There was a community meeting also in August to get feedback from the public, and now we're at work session 2. The next time we're in front of you, we will be asking for a vote on transmittal to the state of the comprehensive plan updates, and in the meantime, there will be a P&Z recommendation in November. So as you recall, the result of the vision was 5 vision goals: protect wildlife, maintain rural places, grow walkable, get active, and be green. And each of those came with a set of strategies and recommendations, some of which were directly related to the comprehensive plan, and some of which are outside the comprehensive plan or related to other elements that are currently being updated. And then, in addition to the vision-based updates to the comprehensive plan, we also were coming specifically to the future land use element with a view of better organization and clarity. This may sound familiar. We talked the same way about the zoning update, the update to the zoning chapter of the Land Development Code. So if you see on the left, the current comprehensive plan, the future land use element in particular of the comprehensive plan, is organized around the How Should We Grow 2007 Central Florida Growth Vision. That was, I think, had a lot of community support, was done at a regional level, and what we're proposing today is very much in line with that, but we have had the opportunity since then both to reflect on some of the outcomes of that as well as to do a Seminole County-based vision. And so we think it's proper that the comprehensive plan now be based on the Seminole County-specific vision rather than the regional vision. We also noticed that in trying to hew to the Central Florida regional vision, there were some weird organizational things that happened in the current plan. So we're trying to fix those and also not make the same mistakes. So you'll see the organization includes the vision plan goals, but is not married to those goals in terms of its organization. It's organized in a way that's going to be usable for the public and for other development community members that are going to be using the plan as well as staff. So these are the vision goals that we shared with you, or these are the comprehensive plan goals that we shared with you last time, which were really the substantive ones: wildlife, natural resources, and sustainability, grow walkable and active. That first one combines be green and protect wildlife. The second one combines the vision goals of growing walkable and getting active. And the third, enhancing existing places, actually wasn't a vision goal, but of course is something important. We recognize that there are parts of the comprehensive plan, either procedural or geographic, that need to be addressed whether or not they were part of the vision. Finally, maintain rural places, that covers the last vision goal. And then property rights is a significant element of the existing plan that, of course, is important to the county and needs to be maintained. Since we talked with you last, we also identified some other goals that were necessary just to organize the plan. The first of those is manage growth and conservation. That's goal 1, and goal 6, which is coordination of investments. Those house important policies that are necessary for the function of the plan, but didn't necessarily relate to one of the vision goals. Through this process, we are also going to be looking at the organization of the overall comprehensive plan. While most of our discussion focuses on the future land use element, the overall comprehensive plan, we also want to, while not making tons of changes within each of those elements, although there are some recommended by the departments, we want to make sure that it's understandable to the public and accessible. So we're taking some steps to communicate the organization of the plan and the introduction to help make it more accessible. We're not really focused on that today, but you will see that as part of what comes back to you in November. So those first 2 vision goals, be green and protect wildlife, as I mentioned, leading to that comprehensive plan goal of wildlife, natural resources, and sustainability. We went through the verbiage of the goal last time, so I won't repeat it. But we think it really provides more of a vision for what the intent of this section is, rather than kind of the functional definition that was there before. What we did not talk about last time was the NPDES recommendations. This is a report that talks about how we deal with water, and it's something that the staff has been incorporating throughout the Land Development Code updates, and it also has important updates within the comprehensive plan, so those were incorporated as well. affecting how we deal with impaired water bodies as well as stormwater pollutants. Another thing that, and so just to back up a second, we talked about certain updates that fall under this goal last time, so I'm not repeating those. I'm just talking about the ones we didn't get to cover last time. So also within this natural resources goal, we looked at the Wekiva River Protection Area. We didn't make major substantive changes here. This is really one of those clarity issues. One of the things we did is move it from countryside to natural resources, because it really is, protecting the river is the core of that set of objectives. And we also made some revisions for clarity, because we got feedback that it was just, there were parts of it that were confusing. So it's been redone in order to clarify those components without changing the substantive things that people who are trying to develop in that area are asked to do. We also added a policy on vegetative resources and tree canopy. We know trees are very important to the public here in Seminole County. We also wanted to make it clear that native plants in general and the Florida-friendly plants that we have already made, we're already proposing updates to the Land Development Code to expand the use of those and to clarify how they're most appropriately implemented in new development. We wanted to make sure there were supporting policies in the comprehensive plan talking about those issues. Again, there's already a fertilizer ordinance, but there was no corresponding policy in the comprehensive plan, so that's now incorporated.
So I have a question. I have a question
Sure.
on that. So the pesticide portion, I understand why it's there, but I'm pretty sure that's mandated by federal and state. I don't know that we can get into the weeds on the pesticide control.
Sure. So we thought it was important to include. We can take a look at whether there's any conflict there, but we don't see an issue with having a statement, a policy level statement from the county that it's something that's important. Should there ever be a change at another level, it could still be dealt with at the county level.
And I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm not a big fan of putting things in that may confuse the public and can also confuse our staff. Just my thoughts. I think we need to be looking at that a little closer.
Following up on Commissioner Zembauer's question, can you tell us which policy flu that language is in? And I hate to do that to you. I don't expect you to have this memorized, but maybe you can point that out to us later on.
Sure.
So we can go back and read that and see exactly what thoughts are.
Yes, and appended to your package, as you know, there was the full text of the future land use amendment that we are proposing. It is a draft, so it is a work in progress, and I'll mention some places that we are still expecting changes, including based on your feedback.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you. I agree with the fact that we don't want to confuse the public, but one of the things that my understanding is that, and something that I think is a positive, is that many times when people come in to look at a comp plan, a building code, whatever they're looking at, and something is not referenced, then they'll come back and say, well, you didn't put that in the comp plan, you didn't put that in the building code, even if it's mandated or required by another level of government. So to reference it, and I thought that's what we were intending here, so to reference it and, as part of our code, kind of could potentially reduce the amount of confusion. And that's I think that that's one thing that we need to make sure of, that we're not adding to the confusion when we're looking at that and saying, well, we don't need it because it's required by somebody else.
And if I could just add on there, there's, in terms of, the intent here, I think, is not around regulating which pesticides are permissible. It is about planting the right plants in the right places to reduce the need for pesticide use, and education and awareness around not over-applying pesticides, rather than maybe what you're talking about, which is the federal regulation of pesticides, chemicals, that kind of issue.
And I did find it's on page 468 of our agenda, flu 2.5.3, letter B. And it says, "The county shall encourage the use of native plant or Florida-friendly species to promote local biodiversity and increase resilience. Responsible management of pests shall be encouraged to reduce pesticides and chemicals according to the Florida-friendly practices." That's the only thing I see related to chemicals, but if there's something else, maybe you'll point it out to us later on.
Yeah, we're not chemists, so we're not
Okay.
trying to.
That's the only one that comes up when you do a word search on the document for pesticide.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Delory.
Real briefly, on the protecting of the water resources, there should be something in there that basically adds the fact that we're trying to move to a one water policy, just so that people realize that there's another piece of the water resources in the future. And then, you're absolutely right, Madam Chair, as well as Commissioner Zimbauer, that we're should make it very clear about the fertilizer ordinance, or fertilizer and pesticide management requirements. We do have a fertilizer ordinance, but sometime in the future, we should revisit that to make sure that what we were trying to accomplish with that ordinance actually is taking place. That'd be my only request.
Good feedback. I don't want to keep you from getting to the rest of your presentation. So Commissioner Constantine, and then we'll let you get back to your presentation.
Yeah, and I think that our staff, I think that's a very good suggestion, Commissioner Delory. I think our staff, when they were putting in that fertilizer, I'm trying to remember what it was, the bill this year that mandated that you could not change your fertilizer ordinance, that our staff did look at it prior to that to make sure that, we were still doing what we were supposed to do, but I think we should continue to do that as
I'm
we
not
should do with
disagreeing with that. I
everything.
just want to make sure that the intent of what we did is being accomplished.
And I also believe that there's going to be potentially in the water resources and protection in this area, probably a number of changes once we get the holistic water policy. And I see that Kim is shaking her head, so there's going to be a number of different potential changes on that.
Yeah, I'll use this opportunity to mention there are at least 3 ongoing plans that will likely result in future additional updates to the comprehensive plan after this. One Water, the Transportation Master Plan, Master Mobility Plan, and the Leisure Services Master Plan. So all of those are ongoing. There's a lot of planning going on, which is great. And we're trying to, we have a deadline for this, so we can't wait for those plans to be done. So we will be making these updates with the expectation that future plans will be made. And we'd be happy to incorporate some language about the ongoing One Water policy, assuming that's the consensus.
Thank you.
Okay. So last thing in this section, the wildlife and sustainability section. So currently there is an FAR bonus for projects in the comprehensive plan. There's an FAR bonus for projects that meet minimum green certification levels for LEED or FGBC. Right now, that only applies to the urban centers and corridors overlay. Forgive the shortening of that. We're proposing as part of this update to make that applicable county-wide. The current increase is a 0.2 FAR increase. That would not necessarily be appropriate county-wide, so our proposal was to change it from a flat 0.2 increase to a 20% increase, which is more scalable to different base level FARs. So that's a substantive change that we're recommending as part of this update. And we would exclude from that bonus the rural protection area, the rural area, and the river protection areas. So it's not applicable everywhere, but it would be applicable more widely within the county.
Commissioner Delory?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is the appropriate thing to do, but when you come to LEED or other green building practices, there's different levels of LEED or building practices, so we need to define what those levels are. So that it's clear what's happening.
And then finally, we've talked as part of the land development update about electric vehicle readiness. This is another example where we are recommending a policy in the plan to support that already ongoing effort in the land development code. Oh, and there is, I said that was the last thing. That is not the last thing. I believe this is the last thing in this section, cluster development, and this is an area where we are looking for direction from the board, more on the next slide than on this slide. So what we've done so far with respect to clustering, and this is one of those elements that is a little bit of a moving target as we go through this draft, both because we need additional direction and just because there's a lot of moving parts. So what we've done so far is we've clarified the intent of clustering around natural resource protection. We've also removed some language that really kind of conflated what's appropriate in an urban condition and what's appropriate in a more natural resource intensive position, not to eliminate those urban plan developments that might reorganize their density in order to innovate or create open space, but to recognize that that's not clustering. That's something different that may be a worthy goal, but it doesn't really accomplish what you would expect with clustering, which is expansive areas of open space, or in some cases, rural farmland. We are also recognizing the value of agricultural and working lands. That's consistent with what's happening at a statewide level with the Florida Wildlife Corridor standards, so we're looking to that as an example. We are looking potentially to clarify, and this would not be in the draft you're seeing now, that certain types of agriculture, like indoor agriculture, would not necessarily meet the goals of creating that wildlife, contributing to that wildlife corridor. So while we can't regulate bona fide agriculture, that could potentially be dealt with through any sort of easement if there's a cluster development project. So where we're looking, and of course happy to get guidance on any portion of this, but where we're specifically looking for guidance is on a couple of pointed elements within the plan. Right now, there are two different standards. There's a standard that calls for a minimum of 1 acre within, say, rural clustering, and there's a standard that calls for a half an acre. And they're not in direct conflict, but they really send mixed messages to the public and to the development community on what they're being asked to do. So we would like guidance on whether the appropriate clustering in these rural natural contexts is a minimum of 1 acre or a minimum of a half acre. The benefit, of course, of the half acre is you potentially get more contiguous land, but the minimum of the acre is it's more likely to be consistent with a rural character or the general larger lot character of the areas where these are likely to happen. And the second one is related to the current A10, R10 rural cluster bonus. Right now, this is the only category in the rural area where you actually get extra density for clustering, whereas the other categories, clustering is an option, but it's not necessarily incentivized with extra units. So those are two areas where we are looking for feedback.
Madam.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you. I could see the pros and cons of the minimum lot size acre versus half acre, although probably in the rural area I would prefer, because I think that the citizens that live there today want to see more of a rural atmosphere. But when it comes to the clustering bonus, and we've seen this in some developments that have come before us, and because we don't do it anywhere else, I don't see the bonus in clustering for the development community is the fact that you are able to consolidate the resources, and therefore the costs of development is less because you're doing it all in a certain area. I don't think that we should be giving density bonuses for clustering in the rural area.
Any other thoughts? Commissioner Sembauer?
I'd prefer to leave it as is. I think the reality is we want to encourage as much open space as possible, and if any development's going to happen, by example, in that A10 zoning category, we want to concentrate that in such a finite space so it does allow for more open space, more green space, more impervious area to actually enjoy. And what we're finding is, even in the rural areas, there are a lot of people don't want large lots. They don't want to maintain it. So I'm a fan of pretty much leaving it as is.
Commissioner Herr?
I actually think that the benefit of clustering is to create that open green space, not to create larger yards that become fertilized and watered. So I offer you that in District 5, we have in what used to be the rural area, a lot of subdivisions, mine is one, where we have acre lots, but it is a lush lawn, and it is probably not environmentally sensitive. So I agree with Commissioner Zembauer, where I think the elephant in the room is the clustering that we've allowed to happen on small infill spaces that maybe aren't infill spaces, where it's really not clustering, it's we've jammed 14 houses into 5 acres on a street that historically has not had that. And that's certainly what's happened in the Lake Sylvan area, and that's the piece of it that I think has created the uproar around the concept of clustering. If clustering looked like this diagram, I think we'd all support clustering. But clustering, at least in my district, and I voted for the one that was the one between the two subdivisions that happened on either side of it, because you can't single out the one in the middle and say, oh, well, no, you can't do it, but they've done it all around you. On your 5-acre lot is now sandwiched in between 30 houses, and you can't put 12 on your property. That's the piece of it where I think we need further guidance, is in the smaller land configurations, what does clustering really mean? Because there's no green space in any of that.
Commissioner Delory.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Herr is spot on several of her comments, because what's happened in small lots, either 5 or 10 acres, that
You're
was...
not surprised, are you?
No, I'm not. You and I agree on
I'm
several
just kidding,
things
Bob.
many times. But I think you're right, Commissioner, where there's a 5-acre tract, people want more density. So just like you're saying, just using different words, that they'll go to clustering, and there is no open space. And if there is, you really can't find it. They may meet the definition of the rule, but if you look at it holistically, you really don't see it. And I think that's the issue that's at hand. In the rural area, I like the larger lots, but in the areas that are not in the rural area, what's happening to these 5 and 10 acre tracts, even smaller, where people are using cluster just to get more density, and that's what we should be looking at. That's exactly almost what you're saying.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that as well, and I think I agree with, it's a different conversation from rural versus, I'll use the phrase urban just because it's the opposite of rural. How do we fix the inconsistency, though? If there's an inconsistency that needs to be made consistent, then does keeping it the same resolve the inconsistency?
So we can maybe put more descriptive language around how you would accomplish. For instance, I think that basically the only way to accomplish the half-acre right now would be through a planned development. We could make that explicit, that it's required to be a planned development, which would, of course, put it in front of this board. We can also potentially make changes through the land development code that would address more clear clustering standards. From our perspective, the very urban, now there are some specific area plans, like Lake Sylvan is a specific area plan that we have not delved deeply into as part of this process. There's the Myrtle Street, that's a specific area plan. The broader issue around planned developments being a way of organizing density in a different way. I mean, from my perspective, as somebody who works on both sides of the line, I wouldn't call that clustering. I also wouldn't say it's a bad thing. It needs to be clear what it's trying to accomplish so you can determine if it's accomplishing that goal. And we did make an effort in the land development code to put clearer expectations around what should come out of plan developments.
Commissioner Constantine and then Commissioner Zembauer. Commissioner Constantine was going to lose the blood coming out of his fingertips, so I needed to call on him quickly.
Well, I'm just trying to raise my hand so that people can see it. And okay, they're asking for direction, and I think that what I've heard from my fellow commissioners is talking about the acre versus the 1/2 acre in the rural area. And in my first comments, I said that is not, I could see the benefits of either or. I believe I'm more interested in making sure that we're consistent when it comes to the clustering, in the rural area as we are with the rest of it. I do not see the benefit of giving density bonus in the rural area for clustering. I see the benefit for any developer is the being able to maximize their opportunities to develop within a smaller area, and that's going to save money. That's the positive, as well as what Commissioner Zimbauer has said. There's a lot of people that are looking to have smaller lots. But I do not think that, in fact, I believe that it is inconsistent with the rural boundary that we would give cluster density benefits in the rural area. And that's what I think they're asking for direction on, and I'm saying we should not give cluster bonuses in the rural area.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
It actually is in the rural segment, and I think staff will speak about that. And that was part of the bonus for the A10 that's been there really forever to encourage open space. But getting to the urban area, I want to make sure that we're not talking past staff and our consultant. Clustering on a 5-acre tract, where has that happened?
So for the record, Rebecca Hammock, Development Services Director.
In the urban area?
Correct. So we have clustering provisions in the comprehensive plan and the land development code based on geographic areas.
Right.
Eliza mentioned like the East Lake Sylvan transitional area, and that's what was discussed previously about some of the subdivisions that are requesting. So they have suburban estates, future land use, which allows 1 dwelling unit per
Right.
acre. But if you develop a clustered subdivision, then you can develop 2.5 dwelling units per acre. So historically, some of those subdivisions, in order to utilize the density bonus in the East Lake Sylvan transitional area, they propose PDs with clustering subdivision, but they may not truly meet the definition of clustering.
Right.
So based on that, we have strengthened our definition of clustering within the land development code, and as part of these comprehensive plan amendments, we are also tightening up the language in the East Lake Sylvan transitional area to demonstrate that, because part of the language in there says that in order to get the 2.5 dwelling units per acre, you have to demonstrate that you have no more impacts
Right.
than 1 dwelling unit per acre. So we're better defining that language and how to demonstrate that. But this specific topic, we are trying, it's two different questions. If you do a cluster subdivision in the rural area, do we want to allow half-acre minimum lot size, which could potentially be in conflict with our well and septic? You can probably get well and septic on a half-acre, probably more difficult to do. And then the second question is specifically related to the R10 future land use designation and the corresponding A10 zoning designation, which allows the density bonus for every 8 acres that you put into conservation preservation land, you get the additional unit. So it ends up being 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres instead of 1 per 10.
Right. Well, I think we have to have, whatever we decide has to have certainty, both for the developers as well as the public.
Correct.
With little to no interpretation, in my opinion, at the staff level.
Exactly. And
So
I
that
think
everybody is treated equally, and we don't see these differences that are going on or have gone on around the county.
Exactly, and it does cause confusion because we have had interested developers in property that has taken advantage of the density bonus in the rural area, and they see the provision in the comprehensive plan that allows a minimum half acre, and then we have to explain, well, that doesn't apply to that because if you take advantage of the density bonus, it was a minimum of 1 acre. So there's some confusing language, so that does need to be clarified. So like Eliza said, if the board still wants to maintain the minimum half acre, we'll clarify that that's if you are developing in a PD and not taking advantage of the density bonus provision. Or if the board wants to allow the minimum half acre with the density bonus provision, that's also an option.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herr?
I'm just going to own it. I didn't think I was confused until I got here for this discussion. So we've identified the problem, and it could be us. I just want to play this through. On your second big green bullet point, direction on LDC inconsistencies, minimum lot sizes for clustering, 1 acre versus a half of acre. Applicable in the rural area or not applicable in the rural area?
I'll defer to staff on this one.
So there's a comprehensive plan policy that if you cluster in the rural area, you can develop a minimum of a half-acre lot size.
So can I just play that through? I'm going to use that picture as the example. If I change that to a minimum of an acre, then all that luscious green space around there is cut by half.
Or more.
You've doubled, another way to say it is that you will double the space that those dwellings take up. And you will create the opportunity, because on a 1 acre lot, I can now build another dwelling, I can put in a pool, I can put in a separate garage, I can cover that land with all sorts of stuff.
And you've got to put in more sidewalks, curbs, and roadways to get between the houses.
And the infrastructure, so that's the piece where I got okay with the half acre because I want to see the open green. And so the advantage that we're giving to the developer to get that additional unit in there gives me open green in the rural area. That's the piece that I'm definitely not understanding the idea that doesn't help maintain consistency out there.
I think what I'm hearing from staff, and maybe staff, they're trying to build consistency between the rural and the urban interpretations because people have looked at it and don't understand how they get one here and one there.
No, what we're trying to clarify is that there is an overall policy in the rural area that you can have a minimum of a half acre for clustering. But then you also have this density bonus provision in the R10 future land use designation that allows you to build more density if you put a certain amount of land within conservation. But that specific density bonus provision requires a minimum of 1 acre lot.
Right.
And so we're asking, do we want to make those two things consistent at 1 acre or a half acre? And I think it's a question of, yes, with a half acre, you're going to have less infrastructure and potentially less impact to natural lands. I think it's a question of character versus open space.
Commissioner
Delary asked to be recognized.
That's great.
You can go to Constantine if you want, I'm fine.
Okay, Commissioner Constantine?
And we're having this open dialogue, so I'm just saying, if we do, which I don't have a problem with what you're suggesting, Commissioner Herr, to have more open space, by giving the density bonus, we're taking away that. I think that we're not being consistent. We're, either, if we're going to do the 1 acre or the 1 acre, in either case, I still think giving the density bonus is, in the rural area, is taking away from the opportunity to have more open space. I don't think, in the urban area, we have no density bonus. I think that in the rural area, we do have a density bonus for clustering.
Yes, East Lake Sylvan transitional area.
Okay, my mistake.
Or PD.
Now, I'm a little bit confused, but I still feel...
Or PD.
Or PD, yes, that's it. But I still feel that in the rural area, what we're doing is we are doing the total opposite of what we're trying to do, which is to maintain the rural flavor of it, give more open space by doing the clustering if we're then giving them bonuses in the rural area. So I'm opposed to giving density bonuses in the rural area, and I think that if we're going to be consistent here, we should all be.
Commissioner Delary, would you
Thank you,
like-
Madam Chair. I think we're all trying to get to the same point. We're just trying to figure out how to get there. What I'd like to see, if Rebecca and her staff could do this, give us some examples so we can actually see it instead of just looking at that one slide and say, the area is going to double, well, show it to us, show us how the area is going to double. Give us an example so we can actually see it. And the same thing goes with the density bonus, and I think Commissioner Constantine makes a valid point. Give us an example of what space actually happens in that density bonus element. And I think by looking at those 3 different scenarios, we'll be able to figure out or articulate what we like, what we don't like.
Commissioner Zambaras, we recognize, and Commissioner Herr.
Just a final, and I agree. I think we're all headed in the right direction. I think the real question, I think what I'm hearing here is, we want more green space, right?
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do.
We want more green space. So what gives us more green space? Is it spreading the homes and roadways and sidewalks and all that over a certain geographic area, or bringing them into a smaller geographic area and leaving more open and green spaces? I think if we're really trying to drive for more open spaces and green spaces, I think you stay with where you're at.
Commissioner Herr?
And I think that's a fabulous idea, because a picture is worth 1,000 words in this instance. When you bring that back, I do want to be super clear about where we're trying to eliminate inconsistencies. I don't think we're trying to eliminate inconsistencies between how we treat the rural area and how we treat the urban area.
Right.
We are trying to eliminate inconsistencies within the rural area, in the LDC, and the other documents that are driving this. So I don't think they all have to be alike, and we've mixed that up here, too. So I'm seeing head nods in that area as well, for clarity.
So I have a couple of questions, and one of the things that we talked about in our briefing is that the half acre versus acre, from my perspective as someone who has a septic tank, and when these newer developments come in and the community opposes package plants for water, and you're on 1 acre lots, and we're talking about drilling, multiple wells versus the compaction of these neighborhoods and the desire of developers to develop on 1 acre lots versus half acre lots, and the need from an infrastructure perspective, not just pavement and sidewalk, but truly the issue that people may be having with wells and septics on the same lot if we're not going to be giving them the ability to build package plants. I'd love to hear from the development community what their flavor is and what they perceive the market to be on 1 acre versus half acre out in the rural area, and how are they going to manage septic and well on a half acre lot? Those were a couple of the questions that we talked about. The other thing that I think is well, I don't know if it's on a slide or not, but I have a question when we get to page 482 of the agenda, Flu 3.3. I don't know if this is related to that or not, if that makes sense to go there or not. And we also didn't talk about electric vehicles, but I don't know if we want to tackle that either. We kind of skipped over that. Anyway, that's all I've got on this. I agree completely with the picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think we're conflating where the inconsistencies lie, and I think I agree with Commissioner Zembauer. We're all trying to get to more green space, but how do we practically do it in a way that people will latch onto?
So one more thing that has some relationship to the previous discussion and relates to the resources piece. So we discussed this briefly last time, but we didn't really, we didn't ask for explicit direction, and we also didn't have the benefit of our environmental services team here last time, so we didn't want to get too deep into this. As we discussed last time, the Florida legislature has passed a bill that requires the use of enhanced or advanced septic systems on lots that are less than or equal to 1 acre when they are located in these BMAP areas, which are where the water is viewed as impaired. And if you look at the map on the screen, that is the overlap of a number of different BMAPs, but those are the areas of the county that would be covered by this rule. And we do actually have an exhibit here that shows a little more detail. Oops, sorry. I want to go ahead and both. It's the second page. If we hand out all of it at once. Oh, keep going for me. So what Rebecca is going to hand around is basically this same map, but with the utilities, the county utilities shown. What we don't have at this time is all of the private utility services. It also shows the city boundaries. So essentially, we anticipate, although we have not 100% proven at this juncture, that the small white area on the left would be largely on sewer, so it really wouldn't be an issue. But we do know that, of course, the East Rural area on the right has much more area that is not on sewer, and by intention. So the question that we are asking today is, should the county, at its option, expand this requirement for use of advanced septic, which could be active or passive, to the whole county as opposed to just the areas of the county where it's required by state law. And this also, as we our proposal at this point is that it would be implemented in the same way that the state requirements are implemented. If you're getting those, it may be the second page if you've got that clip together. So it would not affect somebody who has an aging septic tank who's trying to replace it. They wouldn't necessarily have to follow the new rules, which is consistent with what the state is doing. I'll also jump here to we looked at the area that's excluded from the state requirements. Here on the right, you see in the white the areas that are not in the rural area, and then in the colors, those are the areas that are in the rural area. You can see that it includes, much of that area is under R5 or R10, where they would have larger lots. So if they have those larger lots, they are not impacted by this requirement. Of course, should they choose to cluster to 1 acre, they would be impacted by this requirement. We're also suggesting that the board consider that any cluster development would have to comply with the advanced septic requirements. That way, if they're at 1.1 acres lots, that they would still have to comply. So we wouldn't end up with people just, kind of increasing the lot size a little bit to avoid that requirement. We also did get some input on the cost. It looks like there's minimal differences in the upfront costs, but potentially significant increase in the annual maintenance costs. These are based on the research that the departments have done, but they are potential to change over time, particularly as it relates to the maintenance requirements. And we've gotten some feedback that the advanced maintenance may sound a little high relative to people's experience, or that the conventional may be a little low. The passive is the best combination of low upfront cost and low maintenance cost, but not all lots can do that based on their size and configuration, because those facilities take up more space. So with all of that, I will go back to the initial question, which is, should these state requirements be implemented countywide, and should they be implemented, which would only affect 1 acre or less size lots? Of course, relates to our earlier conversation, were people to cluster to half an acre, of course it would apply. And then also the county could, at its discretion, apply it to all cluster developments.
Commissioners, anybody be able to give a quick up, down, thumbs up, thumbs down answer to Eliza on this one?
I say go with state requirements and call it a day.
Countywide?
No, not countywide.
Oh, okay.
Only
I'm
in the
glad I
BMAP
asked for
areas.
clarification, because that's how I interpreted that.
No.
All right, so anyone else have an opinion?
I would go yes, yes, and yes. If you wanted a quick answer.
I did.
And
I
that's
did.
what I'm saying, yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes, and yes on the 3 questions.
Okay.
Clustering, countywide, advanced. And I'm just going to put this caveat. eventually, we're going to have to do it, and I mean sooner than later. It's going to cost a lot of money if we have to retrofit. There's minimal difference. It makes no sense to allow people to put in obsolete septic tanks.
Commissioner
And that's
Herr?
what they are.
Okay, Commissioner Herr and then Commissioner Zembauer.
So, I just want to make sure that I see Commissioner Constantine's face when I say this, but I agree.
With what?
With what I just said.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Look. Look at his face. Here, so if you take us back, Eliza, to the cost differential, and I've gone back and forth with the team here on this. The cost differential here, first of all, annual maintenance on a regular septic tank is not $75.
No.
Nowhere near. It's probably quite.
If you're doing it right.
If you're doing it, if you're dancing around it, I guess you can't even get somebody to come out for $75 with a truck that could do anything. And so when I look at the difference here, when you're new development, the difference between $11,000 and $12,100, so let's call that $1,200, plus the annual maintenance difference that may be an additional $200 or $300 by the time we think the advanced is too high. I don't know why you would subject somebody to, at the point of replacement, to, at that time in the universe, having to replace it for a much different level. I actually think doing it now is the best way to do this. We have to start phasing this in at some point because it's the reality. So allowing people to, the definition of insanity is what's coming to my mind, is that allowing folks to continue to implement something that we know is not the future is probably a bad idea. What I don't think that means is that when somebody who has a conventional system now goes to replace it, that we're forcing the issue there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
And forgive me, someone had their hand up. Commissioner Zembauer.
So we're not forcing it.
So I agree that we want to be good stewards and we want to do the best we can to handle these septic tanks, but here's the reality of the unintended consequences. If you all ever get an opportunity to go out and look at some of these advanced units, throw them on a half-acre or one-acre lot, now you no longer have a swimming pool capability, you no longer have a place to put a shed because of the drain field and the way it's set up. So that is going to impact the reality of what happens with development. And then we're going to have to go back and say, well, R1AA really can't go here because you can't put that many units on this piece of land with advanced septic. There's not enough room. So I think we really better be paying attention to that very closely. And I will tell you, there are good ones, there are bad ones. The technology has come a long way. I'm not convinced it's all the way there yet.
So if I could just weigh in, what I see on here is that we're talking about that for lots larger than an acre, because I agree with your concern, Commissioner Zembauer, on the smaller lots. At least that's what's on
No, it's
slide
small.
18.
It's the other way.
Should be less than or equal to an acre.
Right.
So it's required on
the other way.
smaller lots.
I apologize.
yeah.
Thank you.
And then we're going to
We're all
have to build
getting a little
storage units, and people don't want storage units to put all their stuff. They can't have a shed on their property, so it's just a revolving.
Right. So, that's pretty funny. So we had this discussion also yesterday. The enhanced septic systems at one time, and I have not kept up with this, but there was a problem for folks who might be on certain types of medical treatment, whether you were on chemotherapy, that the systems at the time were not processing waste from humans who are on different types of medications. And that's something that I definitely want to get the answer to before I make a decision. Because yes, cost is a factor, is a huge factor, but if you have someone who is required to put one of these in, and they are for some reason diagnosed with a condition where they have to be on a medication that this system does not process, that's a huge problem. So, and that was something at one time. I have not looked into this in years, so if staff could just look into that and give me the latest, greatest, that'd be super helpful. I fundamentally agree with the thought process of making it consistent across the entire county, just for ease of moving forward and all that good stuff, as long as it's not. going to be cumbersome for those who are having to replace systems. Commissioner Constantine and then Commissioner
Well,
Herr.
Commissioner, I agree with all your concerns, as I do with Commissioner Zimbauer, as far as concerns in making sure that they don't happen. Here's the difference. The standard septic tank isn't changing, and it wasn't processing from everything that I've ever read, the concerns that you had. The advanced is continually improving. So what we're talking about now is the future or the past. And the fact is that there are many different types of potentials for the advanced septic tank, which would alleviate the concerns that Commissioner Zimbauer has indicated. And all of the new advanced, from everything that I've read, takes care of the concerns that you've had, that you're talking about.
And that's phenomenal. So if staff can just get that to us, that would be great.
So again, what I'm saying is, yes, yes, and yes. I think that we should move to the future and not talk about, allowing these new developments to go in and put, obsolete septic tanks in.
Commissioner Delary and Commissioner Herr.
First of all, they won't be able to put obsolete septic systems in because the state won't allow it, correct?
In the
Only in the
BMAP area.
areas
In the
where
BMAP
the
area.
We're talking about
BMAPs.
just the areas that,
Okay. In the BMAP area, they won't be allowed to do that.
the standards.
In the areas that, if they did put advanced systems in, how much of the property would not be able to be developed? What other requirements would happen with that area?
So I think it depends on the system. So the passive systems do take up more space, and those are the ones with the lower maintenance over time. I don't know if our environmental services team has anything to add on the size of the septic, advanced versus conventional septic systems at this time.
And
Looks
the
like-
reason I'm asking that is because, we need to be very definitive. Are we talking passive? Are we talking advanced? What level of this are we talking about?
So either would be compliant, it's just that my understanding is that the advanced would take up less space, and that's why people would use that.
When you say they're both being compliant, you're talking about the passive and the active advanced.
The state regs.
I just want to make sure, that everybody understands, because we don't want to get any more confusion.
Ms. Ornberg, before you answer that question, Commissioner Herr has something she'd like to tag, so you can do a double do.
I actually am going to pick up where you left off on the additional information, getting the
I'm
pictures.
not done yet, but keep going.
I'm with you, but I actually think that on 576, it is a 5, on page 576, where you have the graph on the cost, we need to expand that to include the acreage that's required, what land mass does each of the 3 systems occupy to address this issue. I have a philosophical belief on where I should be, but it needs to be fact-based. And right now, simply calling you up here to talk about this is freaking me out a little bit. It's probably freaking you out a little bit, too. So I think this is a follow-up item to get super specific about what the impact to it is, because I think it is a legitimate concern.
Agreed.
And then maybe a secondary chart of what are the things that are not addressed through the processing of these systems, conventional, advanced, and passive, so we can make an intelligent decision on this.
Okay. Commissioner Delary, would you like to finish your questions?
Yes, I'd like to hear from staff first.
Good morning. Kim Ornberg, Environmental Services Director. And as far as the passive systems, my understanding of that, what I've seen is it was actually during the construction of the installation of those passive systems, because they have to have, just the way it's constructed, that you would need a larger space to open, the hole in the ground. That was my understanding, was the big difference in the system, not the actual footprint, but we would need to, I would want to follow up on that and to ensure that that's, what I'm saying is accurate.
So it sounds like the consensus is that we'd like to have some more information, pulling it out. Okay.
Correct.
And I would think with that same information, I would like, since we're talking about less than 1 acre, is state requirements. Most of these, or many of these, septic systems, that same property will be on a dedicated well. And there is a statutory requirement of the distance between the septic and the well that could render property unusable if we make the wrong decision. So I think that needs to be part of consideration when we get all this information. We certainly don't want to take a property that has rights now and gut those rights because of, again, unintended consequence. So that'd be very helpful.
Okay, so I think the county manager and staff have clear as mud direction on where we're going next on that topic. And then, Eliza, before we move on to what I'm assuming would be the policies in the 4s, with your presentation, I do have a couple things I'd like to address just in the 3s. And I know I'm sounding obtuse, but I don't have a correlation between the slide deck and what it reflects back to in the
Flu.
So I went.
Which would be
through,
helpful.
Well, I would, and it's not a big deal, but I went through the language. When we're looking at page 476 of the agenda, flu 3.2.2A, this is not new language, this is old language, and it's protect wetland and flood-prone areas in the east rural area consistent with the provisions of the future land use and conservation elements of this plan, and through the potential purchase of properties with funds deriving from the Natural Lands Program authorized by voter referendum in 1990 and 2000. And I'm just wondering if we would want to update that language to reflect Seminole Forever, or because my understanding is those funds are spent from 1990 and 2000, so it's no longer relevant. So I would just ask if there's consensus from the board that staff look at updating that language.
When we approve an ordinance, it should always be updated almost automatically, but yes.
I see
Absolutely.
Heads nodding, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the other item in the 3s, page 482, objective flu 3.3, to protect the existing rural character in established existing large lot residential neighborhoods within the specified rural boundary and rural neighborhoods within the urban service area of the county. I would like a definition of rural neighborhoods within the urban service area of Seminole County, because I believe that rural would mean no streetlights, no sidewalks, no fire hydrants, no, because one man's rural is not another man's rural.
Right.
And I just think that could help us moving forward.
There are.
Unless there's already a definition for rural neighborhoods within the urban service area.
We can definitely clarify that, and we also have established the rural enclave policy, which is going to provide more definition for those rural enclaves. We'll validate whether or not there's anything outside of that needs to be addressed.
Okay, I appreciate that. Because I wasn't sure if rural neighborhoods was another way of saying rural enclaves, or if that was an additional type of designation that we were giving to certain neighborhoods.
For the record, Rebecca Hammock, Development Services Director. So currently in the comprehensive plan, the two designated rural areas of the county are the Wekiva River Protection Area, which is in the urban area, so it's likely referencing neighborhoods within the Wekiva River Protection Area. And then, of course, we have the rural area and the east rural area. But we'll make sure we clean that language up, and then, as Eliza stated, we are creating the policies for the rural enclaves, which will be areas which are rural in character within the urban area.
Okay. So just because my brain isn't, so you're saying that you're going to clean up the language to define that the rural neighborhood in this circumstance is pertaining to rural enclaves or those in the Wekiva River Protection Area?
Yes, so we'll look
Okay.
at that and and kind of analyze that and see what it's referencing, and then make sure we create consistency for anything within the urban area, we'll align that with the policies that we're creating for rural enclaves.
Okay, because I think we have neighborhoods in the Wekiva River Protection Area that have all of the urban services and would not be rural in terms of the neighborhood, but we have lots of neighborhoods that do not have urban services that would be considered rural that are not in the Wekiva River Protection Area. Does that make sense?
Yes, exactly,
Okay.
and I agree, yes.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anything else before Eliza moves on to her? Yes, Commissioner Herr.
Yeah, I had a note under 2.1.2C, and this is relative to the enforcement of the urban bear management ordinance. It's on page 14 of the document. I don't know what page it is in the board book. And the way it's stated, it says enforcement of the urban bear management ordinance. I think it needs to be enforcement and education of the urban bear management ordinance. And we are doing some of that now, but certainly more needs to happen with regard to making sure that all of the folks that move into these areas understand how to live with bears.
So it's page 446 if you're following along in a paper-bound book. And I think is it letter C that you're referencing?
It is, letter C.
Read what you see again.
Right now, it says enforcement of the urban bear management ordinance, and I propose that it's enforcement and education.
Okay. Any feedback on that with Commissioner Herr to give direction to staff to change that?
Education is good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else? All right, Ms. Harris. I think we'll move on to the next one.
Okay, moving on to our policies resulting from the vision goals of grow walkable communities and support active lifestyles. And again, as with last time, we did address some of these previously, although in this section, there are a number of things we addressed at a very high level, but we're digging into more details. So as we talked about previously, the intent here is to encourage efficient use of land, housing choice, and economically vibrant, active places that use and enable the use of multimodal transportation. Our goals here were to streamline. There was a lot of language that was consistent with the idea of creating walkable multimodal places based on the How Should We Grow regional vision in the existing comp plan, but there was a lot of repetition. There were also some standards that were, there were incentive programs that were fairly complicated, and based on the review of what had been done to date, essentially no one had tapped into these programs presumably because of either they were too complex and/or the incentive was not great enough for them to want to tap into these. One of those was the MXD program, the Mixed Use Development Land Use category, which is directly applied to a couple of properties, but not very many properties. And the second one is the Urban Centers and Corridors Overlay Program. And that is the second exhibit that was passed out is the Urban Centers and Corridors Overlay. And at some point, I don't know if we want to put this up on screen at some point, but that will interfere with the slide deck. So maybe we should show it briefly here. And we also did want to recognize the important relationship between land use and transportation within the future land use element. Of course, there is a transportation element, but part of the way that our transportation system is built is through development, through the roads that are built as part of new projects. We can keep going if this is, keep going, okay. So all of you have the Urban Centers and Corridors overlay in front of you. We have talked about this previously, and there's an overlay on this map that you haven't seen previously, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. In order to take advantage of this program, you would be required to opt into pedestrian-oriented design standards. In large part, that is the mixed-use development standards that we are currently reviewing as part of the Land Development Code update process, the mixed-use corridor development and the missing middle standards. There are basically two categories that are currently created in the draft. One is for non-residential future land use districts that fall within this boundary, and the other is for residential future land use districts that fall within the boundary. Subject to site review by the board and compliance with the bonus criteria, there would be access to densities up to 75 units an acre. We're going to talk a little bit about the economics behind that, but in addition to looking at the economic piece, we also looked at comparables around the region, as well as the types of goals that we have around creating these mixed-use walkable places to get to supportive transit, to get to places that you can comfortably walk from somewhere you are to somewhere you want to be. You have to have things closer together, and then at a practical level, that means increased density and intensity. There are some overlapping overlays, which we addressed in terms of the overlap with the HIP areas as well as the Oxford overlay. The HIP areas in particular have limits on how much residential that you can put in, and this would not change that. Particularly the airport area, we understand there's a compelling reason not to have a significant amount of residential there, so this would not allow that to happen where it wasn't intended. That's for the non-residential, so these are the commercial properties that are essentially right on the corridor. For the residential future land use districts, we are also looking at some of these missing middle and small lot typologies. In looking across, okay, so here's the map, and then someone's gonna have to show me how to change it back before too long. So what you see in the pink is the areas within the overlay, the urban centers and corridors overlay that is in the plan today that are in the unincorporated area. The overlay, I'll go ahead and talk about the overlay now. So the overlay is the mobility areas associated with the updated mobility fee. And for the board members, this is already in front of you, so you can look at it there as well. So the one of the things that was discussed during the last board meeting was whether these higher densities should be limited to the urban mobility area, which is broadly the area between 1792, including the properties fronting 1792 to I-4, as well as 436. I will note there is one update that needs to be made to this map, which is the border of the 436 overlay in the mobility, the blue line, and the pink area are not contiguous. They should be contiguous. The blue line will be moved back to be contiguous with to encompass all of the pink properties. But the way the policies are written, it also includes whether or not, for larger landowners that are only partially within the overlay, it affects that too. Now, we don't have to write the policy exactly the same way as the mobility area, but assuming you want us to move forward with this, we'll flesh this out in more detail. Essentially, the intent being that those higher densities would be available only within that core mobility area. So now that I've gone over this.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Now that I'm looking at this much more closely, and it seems a little bit there are parcels that appear to be single-family residential existing homes that are in the urban corridor buffer. How were these individual? What was the tipping point? The rationale? How were some of these parcels selected? And what? I'm just curious.
So based on the current policies in the adopted comprehensive plan, the urban centers and corridors are defined as a quarter mile from the certain roadways in the county. So you can see what some of those roadways are: 436, 1792, East Lake Mary Boulevard, and half a mile from the Sunrail stations. So that is how these are defined, and it doesn't have the specificity of what's the underlying land use, et cetera, et cetera. Now, can I switch back? Or
Madam Chair.
So you'll note that when the computer comes back up, that's why we have the distinction in the new proposal between what has an underlying future land use district of non-residential and what has an underlying future land use district of residential. And the same things are not allowed in both places, so we can make that distinction.
Okay, and I'm assuming that because of the patchwork quiltedness of city versus county going through some of these corridors, that's why it looks so splotchy.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, so the
Okay.
pink areas are unincorporated, and the areas excluded are the city areas.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Constantine?
Okay, so to use your phrase, the squatchy areas. Splotchy areas are the pink. I hate to tell you or ask you to do this, could you go back to the map, please? That's what my question was there. So the higher density corridors you're talking about right now are the ones that are in the pink?
Yes.
And you're saying all of those are not in cities?
Correct.
That's correct.
And we see the core, but then we're going into the suburb areas in a couple of places. And the reason for that?
So these corridors were defined in the previous comprehensive plan back in 2012. What we are suggesting as part of this plan, our original plan was just to use those predefined corridors. The additional potential direction we could get at this time would be to to tier it, so the higher densities would only be available within the
Core area?
within essentially here to here.
District 4.
And down 436. So between 1792 and including the properties within the 1792 corridor to I-4 and down 436.
The spine of the county.
The core areas?
That's right.
Yes.
Do we always talk about?
Okay.
The core as defined in the mobility plan,
Do we always talk?
or the mobility areas.
Yes, Commissioner Zembauer?
And I think this can be somewhat confusing, I think, to probably some of us and probably the public that's watching, because there's no designation with the cities. And the reality is, many of these splotchy areas, if you continued those through the city, they're every bit as splotchy, if not more, in some of these areas.
Yes, so it's
So if you're going to
interfaces,
connect
yeah.
the whole corridor of what it truly is resembling on the landscape, it's much different than this. And I think we should be following some kind of transitioning in and around those cities where we already have density to be consistent or somewhat consistent with what the cities are doing along those corridors as well.
You mean like some joint planning agreements?
I've been pushing for those for 5 years.
It was a softball.
We all have been doing.
And I do think, to your point, Commissioner Zembauer, there are some cities, I'll name Castleberry as one, who has completely embraced
Right.
density in their core, and they seek it. So I think that those are good conversations for us, for sure.
Absolutely.
What is the specific direction that you need from the board today? With all of that in mind, that's all good and we have to do that, what do you need from us today?
So there's more explication of this, if you would entertain that, about, before we ask for a specific recommendation, or I can.
Well, I think it would be helpful for us to know what it is you're going to be asking for, so that as you're giving your presentation, we can be thinking about it, if you don't mind.
So the basic question is, A, are we comfortable with the recommendations in general around essentially to put it hopefully plainly, the issue is the county has a policy that it wants to see urban development in these corridors. It's not happening. We're making changes to try to make it happen. Is the commission comfortable with those changes that we're proposing? And then within that, does the commission favor limiting the more intense allowances to this core mobility area?
Okay. I think that's very helpful for me to know where we're headed. If you don't, and then say whatever else you'd like to say before we go down the line.
So I didn't quite get to the residential future land use districts on this slide, I believe, but let me say broadly that as you get to smaller parcels, it actually makes sense that the density should go up, because essentially to fit the same types of buildings on a smaller parcel, you actually get higher density because you're not building new roads, you're not building, we want people to build on the existing infrastructure and take advantage of that rather than building new infrastructure, and yet densities tend to penalize that because they penalize smaller properties. So we're trying to reverse that here in the bottom, where we're allowing for higher density on the smaller properties. We can skip through that because that is what we've been looking at. So we want to talk a little bit about the small properties for a minute. So in some analysis, we identified over almost 500 properties under 3 acres that fall within this overlay. Many of those parcels have been vacant for a long time. The examples that I'm about to show you, I understand, have been vacant since the mid-90s. And very little is happening. So how do we encourage something to happen? These small parcels are also interesting because the big national groups tend to avoid them. They don't meet the requirements for what a big multifamily developer wants to deal with, because they want 200 plus units in a project. So this potentially creates an opportunity for local investment, for the kind of development we used to see where doctors and lawyers were investing in properties as opposed to Wall Street. So we see this as a huge opportunity for small builders to be engaged in some exciting work within the county. These are just examples that we've designed that would fit some of these smaller lots. This is actually designed to fit on an existing 50-foot lot. These also tend to create more attainable situations for potential renters and homeowners. They create a potential attainable ownership opportunities because there just aren't a lot of new ownership opportunities being created that are affordable where it's a single-family house on a single-family lot in these more expensive areas of the community. So to get that affordability, you really have to be sharing a lot with other homeowners. And on the renter side, these smaller properties tend to have a higher motivation to retain their renters. They don't have the ability that a 200-unit property has of just accommodating a certain amount of turnover. If you've only got 4 tenants and you like those tenants, there's much less incentive for you to significantly raise the rent to get somebody new in, because the turnover costs are much higher. And you're more likely to have that human-to-human relationship. So looking at just these small properties, we estimated you could have potentially 4,500 new residential units. These also could incorporate live-work type businesses. We estimated 900 businesses. Now, I will say that was for all the centers and corridors. That number goes down if we limit it to just the core. But that also goes to the tiering question. So this is one of those properties that I mentioned. My team looked, I believe it was this property they said had been vacant since 1994 or 1995. So, is there a desire to see something happen there? We modeled what it might look like to have one of these smaller scale developments incorporated into that neighborhood. And this is a double lot situation. You can see it's just off one of these major corridors, looking into the back of the commercial actually, but that's good because it's accessible, it's walkable to some of these destinations. But maybe one reason that single-family houses haven't wanted to go there. And this is what it looks like. The same project from the other side, 2 of these smaller structures. These particular ones are 6 units per lot. Or 6 units per building. That's with a little bit larger units. You could actually get more units in if you were going to a smaller unit size. And then this is what that might look like on a little bit. Those are kind of single lot, double lot developments. This is a 2-acre parcel, so a little bit bigger, maybe even right up on one of the corridors. We estimate it, depending on the unit size, could go anywhere from 35 to 50 units an acre, including potentially some of those small business live workspaces. So we did do some financial analysis of this. Of course, property, location, property is very unique, but looking at a very broad level, we found that currently, some of the densities that we have in the comp plan, 10 units an acre, even up to 20 units an acre, are very difficult to make work in the economic environment based on the land prices. So we're starting to see a viable on these smaller lots around 30 units an acre, and then a really attractive project for somebody to invest in around 50 units an acre. So that's some of the numbers behind the densities that we're proposing on the small lots. And then I'm going to shift gears just quickly. The MXD, as I mentioned, some of those properties actually exist in the corridor, but technically the commission could approve the MXD future land use anywhere within the urban area. I think shopping center redevelopment, it's not applied there now, but could potentially be applied. Similar range of densities. Right now, it's actually a minimum of 10 units an acre and a maximum of 30 units an acre. That has not been sufficient to generate much activity. So what we're proposing is that if you use a parking structure, which starts to consolidate that parking and not create these large impervious areas, that you would be able to go up to 60 units an acre. We would also provide that same incentive to those smaller lots under 3 units an acre without the need for structured parking, because there's some creative things you can do on these smaller lots to deal with the parking. There are existing bonus programs we also increased the FAR from 0.6 to 1.0. There are existing bonus programs for workforce housing and affordable housing, a 0.2 FAR bonus and a 20 units per acre bonus. So those would be applicable here. So you potentially could get to 80 units an acre and a 1.2 FAR if you take advantage of all those bonus programs. Another substantive change that we've recommended here, rather than having a specific number of units traded off in the comprehensive plan, what we've recommended is that be dealt with in the land development code and be based on market analysis, because it is something that can change rather quickly because the market changes. And then this is the economic analysis behind that. The blue is the surface parking analysis. The green is the structured parking analysis. Again, we are seeing some financial viability of projects in the 30 units an acre range with surface parking. If you want to go to structured parking, which supports that walkability by putting destinations closer together, you really have to be 60 units an acre to even be viable. We did the analysis up to 100 units an acre, although we're not proposing that anywhere in the plan, although that would be a very attractive project according to our analysis. So we fell somewhere in between. So shifting gears a little bit, last couple of things within this topic, support of the multimodal transportation network. These are existing policies that we just reorganized to make them to make them a little more clear and gathered together, but we think that's all very relevant to what we're talking about in terms of mixed use and multimodal development. Also existing policies around pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and expanding the trail network, which of course the county's done a great job of. We have added a policy defining transit-served development. What we're proposing to define it as is development within a quarter mile of route service, essentially buses with 15 minutes or better headways, or within a mile of fixed guideway transit station. Now I will note, you will not find a lot of places, potentially anywhere within the county right now, that has 15-minute headways. We understand that, but that is the kind of service that would really be able to allow somebody to shed a car by choice. So that's why we've proposed that. We could we could support a recommendation maybe up to 30 minutes if the county wanted to be more flexible, but 15 minutes really is the goal.
Aspirational.
I would also note, we did a mile for fixed guideway transit. The current centers are half a mile. We do lots of recommendations where it's tiered, where half a mile is one standard and a mile is a different standard, but we do see people commuting in for up to a mile to these major transit stations.
Madam
Commissioner
Chairman,
Delarey has a question.
just real quickly, and I know you talked about coordinating with different organizations. Since we're talking about transit and transportation, one thing you need to put in there is that we're going to be continuing coordinating with our transportation master plan and our transit master plan to make sure that we're putting in the right infrastructure to meet these needs. Because things will happen if infrastructure is not there.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you very much. This is a lot to take in. We ran through this and everything, but I just want to make sure that as we're moving forward that I understand the goals. The goal is to make these parcels that have not been used, have been sitting vacant for a long time, in some cases infill parcels, more attractive. It seems to me that the more density that we put on them, the value is going to go higher, because that's what usually happens in real estate. and therefore, they're going to be becoming less attractive, and we may just be, and I'm, this is big picture now, we'll be coming back and saying we have to give more density because of the fact that they've increased value. The other thing is, there's been so many PDs that have increased density in other areas that those have become, the people have gone to those and made those more attractive before they've gone to these infill projects. And if, we were tougher on the zoning and the density in other areas, that potentially that these would become more attractive. Just throwing out some ideas here that we need to consider, because the fact of the matter is, I see the need, I understand where you're coming from, and I see the attractiveness. But I also, as Commissioner Zimbauer used the word unintended, or the phrase unintended consequences, in many cases, especially in real estate, when you add the density, then people start saying, okay, X, Y, Z per unit, and therefore the price of that goes up, and then it becomes, through your own chart, less attractive financially. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at all the ramifications here when we're doing that. And I would not, the aspirational goals, I think, are important in this, because we do want to make sure that these are transit-oriented and are able for these, the residents that we put in there that are able to use multimodal systems.
And I would add, we showed some vacant properties on the smaller side. The other condition would be redevelopment, which is, if somebody has a steady income from a small convenience store or something, what's the motivation to have them do something more robust that would capture some of those affordable housing units or something?
And as I've said before, that is, in my opinion, where the real opportunity lies, is in the redevelopment and doing it right the next time, and giving them advantages to redevelop.
So, again, Rebecca Hammack, Development Services Director, and just to clarify, the density bonuses and the intensity bonuses that we're proposing, it's only within the centers and corridors overlay, and then we're looking for feedback to further restrict that possibly only to the mobility area.
Good.
So this isn't applying countywide, it's only applying to the centers and corridors overlay, and it is an opt-in overlay. You don't have to develop under that. It's just if you choose to develop and take advantage of those density and intensity bonuses, then you're required to meet certain criteria, like being the transit-oriented and that type of thing. So you don't necessarily have to develop under it, but if you choose to develop it under it, then you have to meet certain conditions, and then you're eligible for those density increases. And so the more intensity and density we think is appropriate for those, like the 1792 corridor.
And Madam Chair, as I've indicated, when I said that, I agree. I see the benefit of this and the opportunities in those corridors. I just want to make sure that we're also, we want to emphasize the redevelopment. We want to emphasize the mobility aspect of this. We do not want to, unintended consequences of then those things become overpriced. And I can see to people that own those lots right now, they may not have been actively selling it, but oh my gosh, I can get 50 units an acre. All of a sudden, the price will go sky high.
Commissioner Zimbauer and then Commissioner Delary.
Thank you. Several things. The attainable and workforce housing is something that, we have to address. We've talked about it quite a bit for 5 years. It just seems that every time a project gets into development services, it, for whatever reason, can't get to where it needs to go, whether it's the applicant, whether it's our regulations, whatever it might be. We can all sit up here and talk about how great this is, but here's the reality. Got 474 small lots have been identified, give or take, in this geographic area. That all sounds good. First and foremost, there's nothing in this corridor that will even support the density of 30 doable units per acre anytime soon. Mixed use, look at Maitland, by example, in 1792, right down by their Sunrail area. They can't keep commercial entities on the lower floor for nothing. They change like you and I change our socks every day. So that's a problem. But the reality is, these small properties, and the reason this becomes difficult until this board is capable of making tough decisions, which we have to do for the future generations, which is, many of these properties have remained vacant because it's not affordable financially for somebody to go in and build a single-family home on it compared to what's currently surrounding it. So now you identify it as possibly a workforce attainable area or high density, and now the surrounding neighbors are going to come in and say, no. We don't want that. We got our single-family homes here.
Make it a park.
And buy it and put it in the Florida or Seminole forever. So we can all sit up here and talk about, these are great ideas, this is what should happen. The reality is, we have to make tough decisions. This is exactly what needs to happen as far as density in the urban core, which is where the impact fees or mobility fees are incentivizing development. Infrastructure's already there, and we have to understand there's going to be where two worlds collide. It's going to be the world that have been in those neighborhoods for 20, 30, 40 years and preparing for the next generation, as well as keeping workers, our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers right here in our own community, so they're not having to drive in from Volusia Lake and wherever else they might drive from. The mixed use, I have concerns with that. I don't think it's sustainable in this corridor anytime in the near future. I mean, Washington, D.C., great, works good. Arlington, Virginia, works good. Downtown Miami, works good. Downtown Orlando, fantastic. We just don't have the density and population here to do it. Those are my thoughts.
Commissioner Jolari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Zimbaugh made some valid points. Our staff talked a little bit about TOD, transit-oriented development, correct? I concur. Those 4 rail stops are basically, for the development standpoint, majority of it is controlled by the 4 cities, Altamont, Longwood, Lake Mary, and Sanford. Can we actually see, not right now, but the areas around those rail stops that is excluded from this county and it's controlled by the cities? Because it's going to be reducing even more than what we're talking about. Because if you look density, those 4 cities that control those growth and development around those rail stations, it's going to be the ones that will be talking about TOD.
So the areas shown in blue are unincorporated, now subject to any JPAs, which I don't think.
Where do we have a JPA?
Yeah, we don't have a JPA with Altamont Springs, which is where I think a lot of the unincorporated areas are located.
We don't. And, if you look at their plan, they're going to be annexing a lot of that property. The same thing with all the 3 other cities. And so I'd like to see some information on that as well. Because this is all great on paper, but when it comes to reality, unless we have a JPA with those 4 cities, they're the ones going to be in control of it, not us.
Commissioner Herr.
I just would like you to put up, I believe it's page 586, the before and after small lot examples within the urban centers and corridors overlay.
You're going to have to tell me which one you wanted to see.
Stop there.
Okay.
Before and after.
Yeah, the page numbering is always a challenge here. So I just want to take a breath, and I think this picks up on, Commissioner Zimbauer's position around, we're going to have to make hard decisions, which is what we got put here to do. But this hard decision in that before and after is that we are literally going to overshadow that one single-family home on what looks to be a half of a city block to the tune of what I think is 4 or 5 stories.
Should be 3, just as a matter of fact.
1,
It's 3.
2,
It's 3.
3, all right.
40 feet, 45 foot.
And so that is a really, really tough spot to be in because you render that single-family home behind it relatively worthless. Most people aren't going to buy that. And so the question that I have, because this stuff drives me crazy. When that happens, and we've had this discussion in briefing, all you have to do is drive down Park Avenue in Sanford and question, what were they thinking? Massive, beautiful Victorian home next to a cement block duplex, like what were they thinking? And clearly Winter Park didn't think that way, and that changes the whole dynamic of a town. And even though these are in the urban corridors, I still don't think we should put ourselves in that position. So the question that I ask is, in briefing we talked about a buffer, which isn't going to help here. I would be willing to incentivize by increasing in density if they acquire that home while they're doing it.
Oh, wow.
They at least need to make an offer to the person that lives there. So I don't know if I've just caused shivers to run up the county attorney's spine. I'm not saying we have to force the purchase. I'm not saying, condemnation, but I'm saying that the person that lives there needs to have the option of, is this what I want, or do I want to sell out? Just ask them the question.
Commissioner Zembauer.
Understood, good point, but here's the reality, and this comes back to the hard decision-making process. As every community matures and ages, there obviously is a change in the landscape as time moves on. And one argument would be, the counter-argument, I'm not saying this is what I agree with, but the home that would be overshadowed would obviously sell and do the same thing, who knows, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later. It's a tough decision to make. To Commissioner Constantine's argument in every hearing, well, the people who live here have rights too, that already live there, as well as the people that are building there. So where do you strike that balance of, you have a need, you must accommodate for the next generation, and that's the hard conversation this board's got to make, and it's obviously not in the rural area, it's not obviously not in the Ocala area. It has to happen where the infrastructure, transportation, and all that already exists and will continue to develop. It's tough. It's a hard decision we all have to make. But I understand what Commissioner Hurd is saying.
Yeah, and I'm simply asking whether or not we can ask, at the point that we're granting those densities in this area, for the opportunity for that developer to make a fair market value offer to the homeowner that this situation is prime because it's one home that's left there. And I don't know that one home on that lot size can actually do the same thing. It would be really hard.
Sure, I think we could ask. I don't know whether we can mandate.
I get that. I get that. But then that's a different argument than you're doing this to me.
Right.
Ms. Hammack might want to weigh in, and then we'll go to Commissioner Constantine.
Sure. I just wanted to point out two things. So you do see these, of course, are in the urban centers and corridors adjacent to commercial development. So this would actually be a transition between those more intense uses to the single-family uses. But one of the things we could do through the Land Development Code amendments that would follow this is we could have increased setbacks and decreased building heights depending on what's adjacent to it. So if you have a one-story single-family home, then we could do a step-back setback, apply that in that case to create more of a transition between the types of uses.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you. Here's the reality that I think that has been, we've gone around it. I think that Commissioner DeLore even mentioned it. The intensity and the density is going to be established by the cities that have the infrastructure already.
Correct.
And I don't know if we want to even consider the competition or compete with them. I think that, we get the same amount of tax, from them, whether they're in this county, whether they're in the city or not in the city. And the fact of the matter is that density is going to happen. So I think those realities need to be taken into consideration when we're doing this, and not for us to compete as much as to complement. And because when you're talking about these areas, we all know, we've heard, Commissioner, you mentioned Castleberry. Altamont Springs has got those density areas. My old office was demolished so that they could build more condominiums. I mean, and mixed-use offices right there in the Cranes Roost area. It's happening, but it's happening in the cities where the infrastructure is and where the water and sewer is. And I don't know, not to say that we don't have water and sewer in most of these locations, but I just want to make sure that we are complementing that circumstance and not trying to compete with it, because competing with it, we lose.
So perhaps, and I don't know if the board would agree with this or not, but maybe what we ought to do is ask the county manager and your team to reach out to each of the cities that would be represented in this corridor and find out what they are doing. And if we are in alignment with their densities and intensities, then that solves that whole conversation. And it makes complete sense for us to be collaborative in nature anyway, even separate and apart from not having the JPAs in place. So is that something does that make sense to at least figure out, like, how far apart are we from one another in this conversation?
I think it absolutely makes sense, notwithstanding having a JPA, but to Commissioner Herr's point, and this has already happened in my district, in this core, where I have single-family residents living in a home that the city has done huge development, smack up against them. We have no say-so. I mean, and obviously the cities are going to continue to grow, especially 2 or 3 of them at least are going to continue to spread out and annex property throughout the county.
Right. Okay,
There's one
Commissioner
more aspect of it,
Delary.
if I may, Madam Chair.
Sure.
And I think asking the cities what they're planning on, I think is the right idea. But we should also be putting that into a transportation master plan, because with our fixed guidelines, transit, it will drastically affect what we have to put in for infrastructure. Because there are certain roads and crossings that will have significant ramifications in and around the Longwood area in particular of what needs to happen.
Agreed. Commissioner Herr?
So I just want to point out the inverse, and that is, regardless of what the cities are doing, I do think we need to figure it out, and I do think we need to try to align with it to create a smoothness to
The edges?
the edges of the jurisdictions, yeah. We can't force a city to annex.
Right.
And so this situation doesn't go away. We have to plan for it appropriately. Because while we would think that they would, they often don't. And we are experiencing that daily.
And that can change with elections.
Well, and it can change with staff changes, it can change with elections. But in the meantime, the person in that house still has an impairment that can potentially happen.
Right.
And I do see Ms. Hammock's point that right now there is no buffer between the commercial and the single family. And in planning world, usually you would have some type of transitional buffer and intensity. And so I get from their perspective that is the definition of a transitional use on that parcel. But I also understand living in a shadow. And then, of course, someone who may have sat in one of these seats at one point in time would say, well, if they don't want something put on that property, they should buy it, right?
Someone may have said
Someone may have said that at one point in time.
Maybe a few times.
Many times.
Many times.
So there are all sorts of different perspectives on this challenge, and I think we all are identifying the same types of challenges. We just haven't quite figured out the best way to do it. But we all know densities have to increase in this area. So back to your original request, at the end of that portion of your presentation, you were looking for direction from the board that would give you what type of information? What do you need from us so that we can put a check box next to this, or say you're coming back and we'll give it to you later?
I think we sent them to do more work.
We did.
So
But-
I think my takeaways at this point, well, so I'm not sure we got a clear answer on the core area, but I would suspect based on the tenor of the conversation that that would be desirable to limit this to the core area. To deal more specifically with compatibility and transitions to existing neighborhoods, I would point out that one of the things that we were, one of the things that we are looking at as part of this process is how much is enabled kind of automatically through the comprehensive plan versus how much is enabled to enable somebody to rezone to something that might make this possible. Looking at the missing middle standards that we're looking at in the parallel process, there are limitations based on the underlying zoning. For instance, an underlying zoning of R1 would limit somebody to a two-story building, maybe limit them to a quadplex rather than a 6 or 7-plex, and those kinds of limitations could be applied to this condition. Would it be okay if I addressed a couple of factual things that came up during the conversation?
Yes,
So
please.
we did have the opportunity to talk to some of the staff at Maitland, and we found out that within that Maitland City Center, all those properties are leased up, even though the tenants are still working on fit out. So that's good news from a mixed use perspective. I would also note that we're not requiring everything to be ground floor mixed use everywhere as part of these standards. That could be viewed as a negative or a positive, but we are really relying on the market to decide what's appropriate in that respect. One thing that we actually do a lot of work in Winter Park, and there's actually a great selection of condos and duplexes and missing middle that you hardly notice because they're really well designed. So design guidelines are not part of our scope, although we love design guidelines, and would totally think that might help address some of these issues. The comp plan might not be the appropriate place for that, although we could certainly think about policies that talk to that. And just to point out that we've got, this is very typical with our clients and the public. We've got some people concerned that prices are going to go up and some people concerned that prices are going to go down in response to the same activity. So I think based on what we typically see with these missing middle type development is land prices do go up, but affordability also goes up because people are able to share the land. So that is the goal. And I think that, to address more directly the chair's question, I think we have direction to, again, do a little more fine grain with how we would deal with some of these compatibility issues and address how the land development code might further address those.
You guys were tied,
Oh,
exactly tied.
Let my dear friend, Commissioner Constantine,
Since I'm the furthest away.
go first.
All I wanted to say is, I don't want us to design our projects, since we're talking about 1792, like the projects in Maitland. Going up and down 1792, I constantly fear that I'm going to run into those buildings that are right up against 1792. And if that's what we're talking about, I don't want it. And that's all I wanted to say.
I would also, if I can add
Yes,
one more
please.
thing. So we, as part of the MUCD guidelines, we specifically looked at Maitland and tried to do pros and cons. And we kind of came away from the same design standpoint that there probably needs to be a little more space between the buildings and the roadway for everyone's benefit. So I do think that we've addressed that in the MUCD guidelines, or in the MUCD standards in the code. So we can revisit that if it needs to be addressed further, but that's where we've attempted to address that concern.
Thank you. Commissioner Zembauer?
I'm going to try to wrap it up in just a pretty little bow. I think it comes really down to what the five of us, on behalf of the county, what do you want this to be? What do we need to do to have it? Be, do, and have. That's all I'm looking for from y'all. If we want this to be the density corridor, which it should be, what do we need to do to get there so we can have it? And that depends on all of us having an honest discussion with our constituents and ourselves on those tough decisions that lie ahead in this matter.
All right. We're at 11:25, and this has all been really good conversation. How much more do you predict time-wise?
We are very close to the end. I think
Okay,
we can-
and I recognize asking that question really relies largely on
us.
the five of us, but I just wanted to let just 11:25.
So this is our new goal for maintaining rural places, which is straight out of the vision plan. It addresses both agriculture and resource-based businesses, by which we mean sort of nature-based businesses. In fact, we've changed the language to reflect that in some places. We've introduced objectives that organize this information. Previously, I will say that Countryside referred primarily, if not solely, to the East Rural area, but we are recognizing that there are rural areas throughout the county, and we're trying to address that appropriately while not decreasing any of the expectations within the East Rural area. And we also are connecting the natural resources to the rural while still addressing them as separate issues. So the objectives, the major objectives that we're talking about here are preserving rural character in Seminole County as a whole, and then more specifically, an objective for preserving rural character in East Seminole County, which we know is very important. There's some cleanup there related to the language, making sure we're referring to it the same way every time. And we also we added objectives to talk specifically about the economic viability of agricultural and nature-based businesses as economic generators and ways of preserving open lands in the long term. The Land Development Code already accommodates many rural uses. We're reiterating that to some extent within within the policies, and also incorporating, for instance, the solar issue we know can be somewhat controversial, but it's been mandated by the state, so it's something that we're responding to, and able to put in policies and code revisions that make it more compatible. And that agriculture, so we incorporated many of the recommendations from the vision plan, such as establishing a rural business council, doing some economic studies to support rural businesses in the long term. We know you've previously partnered with the Regional Planning Council on such studies, and continuing to support existing programs. Agritourism, just some pretty surface level changes here. Same policy, same title, new policy. So the agritourism policy previously established a rural business council. We've now created a separate policy that establishes the Rural Business Council, but fleshed out the agritourism policy consistent with state law to be more explanatory of what agritourism is and how it's allowed within the county consistent with state law. And that is it. So there's no specific questions we had there unless there was a reaction or a negative reaction.
Well, I don't know if it's negative until I hear the answer to this question. When we talk about the variety of uses being accommodated, farming and ranching, native plant nurseries, equestrian, are we requiring that the plant nurseries be only for native plants?
No.
Okay. Great. I'll find that somewhere in the language to make sure that, trust but verify, right? And then there is an additional, on page 546, this is FLU 6.2.1 under joint planning agreements, kind of going back to our other discussion. There's a new sentence that says the county shall host interjurisdictional planning summits as necessary. So that means we're taking the onus to initiate those, and I don't know what the as necessary is, but I feel like we're there. Especially considering we still don't have an interlocal agreement with the school district that is, we have one, but we haven't updated it, and there's stuff hanging out there. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that that sentence is being added, that we're putting it on us. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just drawing attention to it. That's all I have. Anything else? Commissioner Herr? Commissioner Zembauer?
Just a question on agritourism. So this has been an issue where somebody buys several acres and then they build a venue on the several acres, and then they throw some goats into the mix and let kids come visit the goats, but they can house 100 people at a venue.
So our understanding is that this has changed significantly since we started this process, and essentially has been dealt with by only allowing that to happen on an existing bona fide agricultural operation, rather than kind of the after after effect of adding the goats afterwards. So if there's additional questions, certainly Rebecca could chime in.
Yeah, so
Is it
to be
just
clear, the
goats?
goats were first. No, I'm trying to shorten the conversation, but it was put in the woods across the street from an elementary school and a middle school, and you can't accommodate 100 cars popping in and out of there. And so the neighbors went crazy, and I ran for election and heard about it. And so did Rebecca, for the record. Rebecca Hammock, for the record.
Yes,
Right?
thank you. So in order to legally have agritourism, you have to be a bona fide agricultural use, which means you have to have the agricultural classification from the property appraiser. So you have to apply for that designation through the property appraiser, and if you do have the G1 classification on your property, then you are entitled to have an agritourism use on your property in compliance with state law, which does not permit you to build new structures. You're supposed to use your existing agricultural structures for any type of agritourism use. So we could have code enforcement issues where people are not legally operating an agritourism business and may not have the G1 classification, but what we're doing through the comprehensive plan is just making sure that it complies with the state law requirements for agritourism.
Thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Zimmer?
On that note, I've always advocated, and we never got anywhere when I asked the question of our legal department, and there's always been this interpretation of bona fide existing agricultural operations. The reality is, if they don't file a Form F on their IRS, they're really not a farming operation. And I don't know why that cannot and should not be something that trips the classification. I've talked to the property appraiser about that. He's aware of that. Different counties apparently do it differently. They require Form Fs to be given to the property appraiser in order to get, those types of exemptions and so forth. But we also have been very lax in some of those entities who've gone and just built additional buildings without permits under the guise of it's agricultural when we're doing what we're entitled to do under the state statute. I think that the reality is on this rural issue is I think we're in pretty good shape, but I will tell you what's rural in one person's mind, I think was said here a couple times today, is not rural in somebody else's mind. You can come out to the rural area and you can see horse barns with country-style homes, and the next property would be a 7,000 square foot home that looked like it came out of Heathrow, that arguably is not rural by design or nature. So a definition of rural might be helpful, because we get everybody in here that comes in here that's not in the rural area saying they live in a rural area until they've sold their house to somebody and now it's 6 houses. So these enclaves, I think we need to be looking at very closely as we go down that path. What is the true trend in that area? Because I'm not a fan of, let's call this an enclave because there are 5 remaining folks that have horses there that now one's going to sell next year, another one's going to sell 3 years from now, and another one's going to sell 5 years from now, and you got 2 left. So I think we need to really look at the trend of what's going on before we declare certain areas enclaves. I mean, this has happened over off Thomas Stable in my district. There's still a few over there that still have, their older homes and living that, quote, equestrian lifestyle. But now they're surrounded by development, 2 houses per acre, 3 houses per acre, et cetera, et cetera. So like good definition of what rural means, and I've advocated for this in zoning as well. What is ag and what's not ag? Because we have folks come in here and go, well, I don't know why you're doing that because it's zoned A1. It's only for agriculture. They don't understand how that whole process works. So some good definitions surrounding that I think would be very helpful. And that's all I have.
All right. Anybody else?
Nope.
To be continued. Thank you. All right, we're trying to find page numbers, so. The next item that we have on our agenda this morning is an update from the county attorney, and then we will break for lunch.
I just had a real quick update for you. Hopefully, you all saw the email that was circulated on Friday by Lynn Porter Carlson of the County Attorney's Office that the 5th District Court of Appeal entered an order in the Rivercross Land Company and Chris Dorworth appeal.
We got someone who wants to talk about the work session.
I'm so sorry. We're going to let the county attorney finish the update, and then we'll go to public comment. My apologies.
That's okay. The 5th District entered an order denying the appellant's motion for a written opinion or rehearing en banc, which is a good news item, just in case you didn't know. Just wanted to mention that during the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Great
appreciate the translation from lawyer to English, because I did read the email, and I was like, I really don't know what this means without Googling some of these words, so thank you. Any questions for the attorney? All right. Ms. Coons, public comment
Yes, we have, Nancy Harmon would like to make a comment on the
on the work
hearing.
session. Okay.
Good morning, Nancy Harmon, 752 Pioneer Way, Geneva, Florida. A little under the weather, but I'm not COVID, so. Good. I really enjoyed this conversation again, the openness of your all's dialogue. It was really good. I'm here mostly on the cluster in the rural area. The half acre, I'm going to try to be real quick because I did listen to what you guys said. Thank God for the recording because you can back it up on your live, just in case anybody wants to know. And I know you're going to revisit this again, and I'll revisit my concerns again with staff. But when we talk about half acre, first of all, there's no land that I've found in the rural boundary area that's designated half acre. And I'll go look, and Jay, you may check me on that.
No, there is.
Is it in Chiliota? Oh, in Geneva downtown. Yeah, okay, let me clear that up. In the downtown areas.
And there's some right out there off Old Geneva Road, some small tracts.
Yes, some of those, though, are grandfathered in. But for
Correct.
the majority, when you're talking about doing these cluster developments, normally what people are looking at is larger acreage, because it just makes
Right.
sense.
Sure.
So in that case, the land is zoned 5 acres, not half acre. So when you think about a half acre and you think about fertilizer, when you do a cluster development, if you've seen what we've seen in the areas of the urban, okay, and we recognize it's not really cluster, but nonetheless, when you make the common space common, they fertilize it. So in our rural area, obviously, we would prefer people keep it agricultural, do more natural, just let the grass grow, but that isn't happening, and it won't happen, and there will be fertilizer. So no matter if it's a half acre or a 1 acre, they're going to fertilize it. That's because people from the city are coming into the rural area. An example, though, too, of people not necessarily wanting half acre is right now where the ski lake was. That area is being developed, and they have lots that are like 8 acres, 5 to 8, and I think there's one 9.5 acres. So they've actually taken that land, and they're building large homes. Then across the street from that, Allen has just taken the 50 acres there, and they are set up as 5 acres. So there's still a demand in the rural area for these large acreage. And so when we get back to the clustering thought, it goes back to what are you clustering for? We're clustering to save and preserve natural areas like wetlands and floodplains. So in order to do that, we do want to cluster the properties into an area that's buildable. But in that buildable area is your open space. The open space is not the wetlands and the floodplains. That's not the open space. Could you give me 3 more minutes, please, Geneva Citizens Association? And I'll go further on that. But and then I wanted to talk about the septic, just real quick on that. When you talk about in the rural area, if you were going to do half acres and you are going to mandate advanced sewer or septic on them, why are you not mandating it on the urban area as well? Because people are going to have the same unintended consequences. of not being able to build a pool or put their warehouse or whatever they want in there. And then on agritourism, we do have a situation I'm going to check into, and I don't know, Jay, if you're even aware of this, near...
Not another one.
The one by the lake, Lake Geneva, where they put a beehive in, or they've got beehives, and now they are going to build, from what, the Facebook, I haven't gone and verified it, but the Facebook thing is they're talking about now building a building to have weddings under agritourism. And there's no farm there, nothing. So I really would appreciate the board really looking at that, getting with Johnson and saying, look, show me your 3 years of a business as an agriculture. Bona fide, show me that. And then the other thing is no, you don't build. No pup tents, no nothing, no parking, nothing. I'm done. Have a nice lunch.
Thanks,
Thank
Ms.
you,
Harmon.
Nancy.
I appreciate it.
Bees are good, by the way. We need more bees.
bees.
I can't imagine a wedding among the bees.
I was
That
questioning
was, I don't know the logic of that.
Tough
That could get ugly.
Be in love.
Oh, that's bad. That's bad.
Event planning in his future.
Yeah. So we are going to break for lunch and come back at 1:30, but is there anything, any direction we need to give the county manager, the county attorney while we go into break before we come back?
Just have a good lunch and be ready for some more brutal afternoon session.
Oh, no, don't jinx us. It's going to be a great afternoon. All right, we will recess and reconvene at 1:30.